Hi, my name is Dexter Lau, and I'll be presenting All Your GPS Are Belong to Us towards Stealthy Manipulation of Road Navigation Systems. The original authors of this paper are Kexiong Curtis Zeng of Virginia Tech, Shinan Liu of University of Electronic Science and Technology of China, Yuanchao Xu of Microsoft Research, Dong Wang, Haoyu Li, Yanzhi Do, Gang Wang, and Yaling Yang of Virginia Tech. This was originally presented at the 27th USENIX Security Symposium in Baltimore, August 15th through 17th of 2018. So a bit of context. Over 1 billion users rely on GPS navigation, and any malfunctions have real-world consequences. So for example, in May 19th of 2019, a man actually drove his truck into a river after religiously following the instructions of Google Maps. And then dozens of drivers in June 26th of 2019 were trying to avoid traffic and followed an alternate route through their GPS systems and ended up in the mud. So there's a very, very heavy reliance and billions of users of GPS navigation. The issue is that civilian GPS is vulnerable to GPS spoofing due to the lack of authentication mechanisms. And this is very evident in the real world. So in 2012, a drone was hijacked just by manipulating its GPS. And then in 2013, an $80 million yacht was hijacked by a student spoofing its GPS signals. But spoofing in open environments without roads is very easy compared to spoofing in roads. That's because there's actually no obstacles in the way of open ocean or open air. So just to describe how this process kind of works, spoofing, first, an attacker sends spoofing signals that overtake the original GPS signals, actual GPS signals. And so over time, those signals are trusted to be true. And then the spoofer stealthily kind of manipulates the location of, say, a boat by saying, "Hey, this is your location's over here at this ghost location." When the navigation realizes that it's slightly off course given this fake location that it thinks it's at, it'll update its navigation systems to go to the original destination, but in actuality, it's a spoofed destination because the updated navigation points to someplace else. Um, while GPS spoofing is a known threat, it is not yet clear if spoofing attacks can truly manipulate road navigation systems, because existing works primarily focus on simple attacks by randomly setting user locations, as mentioned before, in open oceans and open air. But roads are different because they can easily be contradicted by just physical roads and highways and other obstacles that a driver sees. So in this paper, the authors explore the feasibility of a stealthy manipulation attack against road navigation systems. The goal is to trigger the fake turn-by-turn navigation to guide the victim to a wrong destination without being noticed. Uh, the authors found that as they slightly shift the GPS location, the fake navigation route has to basically match the original shape of the original journey in order to remain stealthy. So there's a few challenges as mentioned before. Just random naive manipulations don't work because there's actual roads and obstacles in the way. Um, Given the speed you might be driving on a road or traffic you might be driving on a road at a specific set of time that the navigation expects. But if you are there on a shorter or longer period of time, then that road segment becomes much more suspicious. Secondly, if you're trying to turn into a place where there's no road, uh, that's just a physically impossible route. The other issue with cars in particular versus airplanes or ships, human drivers are constantly executing navigation instructions. Um, So every few seconds or every few minutes, there's a new instruction, whereas a ship or a plane kind of go the same route that they're going almost on autopilot. So the deviations cannot be too obvious in order to avoid alerting the human drivers. So here's a example of a stealthy attack. On the left, you'll see kind of the real world where you have a your actual destination and your actual location. And then on the right, you have your navigation map. And here, the blue car kind of represents your ghost location. So instead of having your GPS be where that black location is, your navigation system thinks you're in that blue location, and it'll update its navigation such that it'll point you in a different direction. And when that actually happens, you'll have a ghost route. Um, and that's kind of outlined in this black line here, the victim route. And so you end up in a completely different destination, but the route itself is a somewhat similar shape. Here's another example where you're trying to navigate from point P to D, but partway through, a ghost location is introduced at point B. When that happens, the path is updated, so it tries to get to D, but along the way, the GPS location is spoofed such that you end up at point C instead. And note that the um, the routes have a similar length and a similar shape as the original route, but since the orientation is different because of the spoofed GPS location. And the way this is basically done is creating a directed graph of all the possible intersections and roads from maps. And note that the attack is a lot easier in places where there's a high density. So metropolitan areas like New York and Boston that have lots of roads, especially in the shape of a grid, are much easier to manipulate versus a large open area with very few intersections, such as like the suburbs. So this directed graph, you'll have turns and you'll have segments. And these turns and segments have to somewhat match with the victim routes. Um, at the same time, and so as these directed graphs and the nodes and edges are evaluated through a breadth first search, you can find uh, possible victim routes along the way, or that can be used by the attacker. Um, Partway through, you could also introduce a new ghost location. These additional updates to the ghost location introduce many more possible um, victim routes by basically concatenating these routes together. So here on the right-hand side, you can see what happens if you have one ghost location that has that main segment, and then you update the ghost location one more time, and you can kind of manipulate the driver to do this additional turn. So the threat model kind of comes in three parts. Um, the deviating attack, where the attacker aims to guide the victim to follow a wrong route, but the attacker does not have a specific target destination. In practice, the attacker may detour ambulances or police cars to enter a loop route. Um, Another, probably more interesting, is the targeted deviating attack, which means you actually want to direct the victim to a specified location, um, probably for example, such as an ambush or robbery or stealing a self-driving car. And the third one is an endangering attack, where the attacker essentially just wants to cause harm. So they might direct you onto a one-way road or direct you off a cliff or something that's more dangerous for the driver. To test this data, or to test this hypothesis that cars can actually be manipulated, um, the authors took 600 random real-world trips from New York City and Boston taxi cab driver datasets, illustrated on the right. and they ran basic and iterative attacks, kind of described in the previous slide, where a basic attack, again, is you spoof the ghost location once, and the navigation updates so that the attacker directs the driver to some place in particular or some new destination, or an iterative attack where they provide multiple ghost location updates, not just one. And again, this provides much more flexibility, and can the attacker can then direct the driver to multiple more locations because of this um, additional flexibility. And on average, based on these 600 real-world data trips in the data set, the authors found that 335 qualified victim routes were able to be found just through this basic search on average. And then when you use iterative attacks by concatenating different ghost locations, the attackers could then create 3,507 different iterative attacks. For endangering, like 99.8% of the time, they were able to find some way to get the driver into a dangerous situation, such as a one-way street. To evaluate the risk, the authors created a metric called the hit rate. It describes the ratio of the grids that the victim can be diverted to over all the grids in the attack area. And so the way that this is done is after drawing out the actual taxi trip, you draw a radius of length r around that entire edge. This defines the attack area. And this essentially means how likely a victim route can bypass the attacker-defined destination to achieve targeted diverting. And so if within this grid or this area, the number of grids that are feasible based on the roads that are in the underlying area, it'll just kind of describe how flexible that geography is for an attack. In the end, 70%. There was a 70% median hit rate in Manhattan with a radius of 500 meters. This kind of shows that even random predefined destinations are highly reachable. So you could program an attack to direct drivers to many, many different locations within a certain attack area. Spoofing can be done at a relatively cheap price too. Here's a picture of a device that was used for an example simulation where a Raspberry Pi device of just $35, a transceiver for the GPS signal, an antenna, a mobile charger. All of this was pieced together for around just over $200. It's relatively small, just the size of a pen, which could easily be put in a bag or placed in a car very covertly. It took around 40 seconds to provide a spoof location when the device was put on a car. And then similar results were found as long as the car was around 40 to 50 meters away from the spoofing device. So a user study was designed to see whether or not people could actually be fooled by these fake locations and fake instructions. The way this was done is the authors created a fake study where people came in and drove a driving simulator, and they were provided instructions through a real-time navigation application on their phone. This is for ethical reasons, like this. A real phone's GPS could not be spoofed, so they instead used this dedicated app to fetch GPS sequences from a server. And then the server read the GPS information as the driving simulator as the driving simulator progressed in real time and generated fake locations for the smartphone. At the end, only after the driving sequence was done, users were surveyed to see whether or not they could actually tell that an attack took place. Surprisingly, only 2 of the 40 simulations of the 40 drivers actually noticed something going on. 95% of the time, the drivers couldn't tell, which is pretty frightening. The only reason that the 2 drivers could tell something was going on was discrepancies that stood out. For example, they were driving on a local road, but on the map it showed a highway, or vice versa. There are a few possible ways that people can have countermeasures. During the survey interview, the authors found that most users have had experience with GPS malfunctions in real life. 95% of the users commented that they experienced GPS malfunction in real life, such as losing GPS signals and wrong positioning. One user stated that she even had a car accident due to poor GPS signals. Some users mentioned that it could be very challenging to check road signs constantly. For example, one user stated that the roads in the US all look similar, and sometimes they uh, wouldn't read all the road signs because they're driving so quickly. In addition, users do not understand how GPS spoofing works. Among the 40 participants, only 8 users can explain GPS spoofing correctly. Um, the authors encourage the participants to comment on the differences between using the simulator and real world driving. The most common response is the usage of the keyboard and mouse to control the car for steering and acceleration. One user also commented that they can drive more recklessly in the simulation game. The most different part is that you are afraid of nothing. You're not afraid of red lights, crashing either. These are the limitations of a controlled simulation study. Um, a few possible countermeasures now that we have the authors have fully understood how dangerous this problem actually is. Um, it kind of comes in 2 parts. One is the modification based approach and a modification free based approach. And the first, um, the most effective solution is to upgrade civilian GPS signals to use encryption. Researchers also propose signal authentication for next generation um, global navigation satellite systems. However, this approach is extremely difficult to prevail in the short term, given the massive number of civilian GPS devices already shipped and deployed in the short term. Second, trusted ground infrastructures to help the GPS devices to verify the location and related techniques include trusted verifiers, distance bounding protocols, multilateration, and multi-receiver crowdsourcing, and physical layer feature checks. However, due to the constraints in government policies and the significant costs, dedicated ground infrastructure are also unlikely to be widely deployed. Finally, we can modify the GPS receivers. For example, the angle of arrival of signals can help to estimate the transmitter's location for authenticity check. This requires a large directional antenna array or special moving antenna. Such hardware modifications are not applicable to the billions of mobile phones. Um, at the software level, consistency check algorithms can help to detect the side effects of non smooth GPS takeover. In addition, the GPS receiver can also lock on additional satellites or synchronize with other GPS receivers to identify spoofing. However, these methods often suffer from the multipath effect and are vulnerable to smooth takeovers. Um, of the modification free approaches, the first is location verification. Um, it can leverage existing global navigation satellite system signals and wireless network signals. These external location verifications help but cannot stop the attacker completely because civilian um, GNSS or global navigation satellite systems uh, are also unencrypted. The attacker can perform multi-signal jamming or spoofing against both signals, and similarly, the network location is based on the MAC addresses of the Wi-Fi or cell tower ID, which can also be jammed or spoofed. In addition, a navigation system may cross-check the GPS locations with dead reckoning results based on inertial measurement unit sensors, such as accelerometers, gyroscopes, and magnetometers. However, this method in general suffers from accumulative IMU sensor errors and becomes ineffective as the time drifts. Computer vision based location verification, um, it's a very promising defense to use computer vision techniques to automatically cross examine the physical world landmarks and street signs with the digital maps. So, as you're driving, a camera can actually recognize that a sign in front of you matches your expected location on the map. Recall that in our user study, the authors user study, the two participants recognizing the attack in a similar way, uh, using their comparison of the local roads that they're driving on versus the highway that they see on the map. Given the proliferation of cameras, LiDARs on mobile devices and vehicles, vision based location verification only requires software level upgrades. So far, vision based techniques can accurately localize vehicles up to 3 meters using visual odometry and road maps. Simultaneous localization and mapping can also localize images based on geo-referenced street view databases. In conclusion, the authors explored the feasibility of real-time stealthy GPS spoofing attacks targeting road navigation systems, and they found that through real-world driving tests, taxi trace evaluations, and human-in-the-middle loop user study results all confirmed that high-tech effectiveness um, and efficiency of trying to uh, of being infiltrated by spoofing attacks. Um, Hopefully, the results provided in the study provide concrete evidence to motivate practical defense mechanisms to protect the massive GPS. Again, this is over 1 billion users and GPS-enabled autonomous systems. Thanks.